Saul, son of Kish, never wanted to be king. When the people of Israel gathered to crown him at Mizpah in 1 Samuel chapter 10, he was nowhere to be found. So they inquired again of the Lord, "Did the man come here?" And the Lord said, "See, he has hidden himself among the baggage." It may be that Saul knew what lay ahead, the triumphs and excess, his eventual fall from God's grace, and decided, "No thanks, I'll just stay here with the luggage until everyone goes away." But of course, he is found and crowned. In today's first reading, Saul has reigned for a number of years. However, as we heard last week, God instructs the prophet Samuel to anoint David, the shepherd, as new king over Israel. After killing Goliath, he is brought before Saul, whose first question is, "Whose son are you, young man?" "I am the son of your servant Jesse." Saul soon comes to fear David, for the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. As today's reading recounts, the next day an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he chucks a spear at David to kill him. It seems what the king never wanted has become the thing he cannot concede. Meanwhile, Jonathan, son of Saul, encounters David, and it is love at first sight. Jonathan loved him as his own soul, stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David and his armor, and even his sword and his bow and his belt. Some biblical scholars interpret these actions as symbolic of Jonathan's betrayal of his father and his lineage, voluntarily giving up his own succession to the throne and swearing loyalty to the man whom he senses will be made king. Perhaps he inherited his father's reluctance for royalty, I'll start that part over. Some biblical scholars interpret these actions as symbolic of Jonathan's betrayal of his father and lineage, voluntarily giving up his own succession to the throne and swearing loyalty to the man whom he senses will be made king. Perhaps he inherited his father's reluctance for royalty. Other scholars read these actions as much more intimate. One man stripping his clothing and trappings of war and dressing another man with them as signs of devotion and love. Indeed, when Jonathan is later killed in battle, David laments, "My brother Jonathan, greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women." Today is Father's Day. If we were to take our cue from the Bible, I would have to say that relationships between fathers and sons have always been complicated, shall we say. I'm thinking of, say, Abraham sacrificing Isaac, Noah cursing Ham, Eli the high priest doing nothing to stop his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, from their sacrileges, Saul and Jonathan. In fact, the only positive father-son relationship I can recall in the Bible is when that man brings his demon-possessed son to be healed by Jesus at the bottom of the mountain after the transfiguration. Of course, we do have God proclaiming of Jesus, "This is my son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased." But there's that flip side of God sacrificing his son, as we are told. The stories of women and girls remain largely unheard in the Bible, a sign of the times and the culture, and probably suppression by those who wrote these books. Naomi and Ruth, Mary and Elizabeth, These may be the only instances in the entire Bible in which women actually converse with one another and we hear what they say. Today is Father's Day. And it tends to be a trickier thing to celebrate than Mother's Day for most of us, I think. Not only that, but any talk of fathers or mothers necessarily leaves out some people's experiences because each of our parental situations is unique. That said, I ask your permission for a moment to make some broad stroke assumptions for a paragraph or two, in the hopes that they might reveal something true about these generational relations. As a culture, we tend to see as negative the passing down from father to son of stereotypically masculine traits: aggression, an aversion to showing feelings, success at all costs. Similarly, we don't respond well to mothers who train their daughters to passivity and compliance. And these are good things to reject. What we seem to love is stories of fathers who encourage their daughters to be strong and resilient, who support her in her strivings to succeed, like Thomas More did when he insisted that his 3 daughters receive the same classical education as his son in the 16th century. And we love the stories of a mother who instills in her son emotional intelligence and compassion, like the kind of influence his mother had on Marcel Proust, enabling him to write with such psychological acuity his masterpiece, Remembrance of Things Past. Such parents go against the grain of what society considers appropriate masculine and feminine traits. So maybe the best parent is the one who can do both: encourage and nurture, push forward, yet embrace. I don't quite know where I'm going with this, but I felt it important to mention the fact that both Father's and Mother's Day can bring out this stuff in many of us, from ambivalence to antipathy, even as many of us also have warm, loving memories of our dads and moms. Things are changing, as is our culture, and I pray that these 2 days of parental honoring each year become more and more celebrations of how we nurture and pass on love and affection from one generation to another. I did not mourn my father's death. I only felt relief. 31 years of alcoholism, the last 7 with a liver that barely functioned. He never was much fun to be around. Still, seeing him so helpless on his hospital bed on the last day he was alive, almost 30 years ago, I felt this need to comfort him, to show him kindness rather than indifference, just once. So I did this kind of awkward and embarrassing thing. I tried to force a deathbed reconciliation with him. Now, all of the relatives were gathered around because they knew he was dying soon, and so I couldn't get a moment alone with him until his parents showed up, who were still alive, my grandmother and grandfather, from Chicago to the hospital in Milwaukee. All the family left the room to go downstairs to meet them, and I was alone with my father for a moment. I knew I didn't have much time, so I cut to the chase. He could hear and understand, but couldn't really talk. I said, "Pa, Pa." And he had his eyes open looking at me, and he said, And I said, "Pa, you know I love you, don't you?" And he said, and that wasn't in my script. And so I got a little snippy, and I said, "Well, I do, okay?" And he paused, and then he said, and he died that night. And when I think back on that forced little 90 seconds, I can't help but regret that I hadn't tried to do that sooner, that I hadn't tried to make the connection. But I did not mourn my father's death. I did, however, eventually come to understand his life. After he died, after some time passed, my mother, for the first time, told me stories of how she and my father would stay up late, and he would tell her about his growing up on a ranch in Durango, Mexico, riding horses, tending to cattle, being free in the warm, hot Mexican air. His father, my grandfather, not a nice man, decided that the whole family was going to move to the United States, and so they emigrated to Chicago in 1956 or 7. And my father, instead of being on horses on a ranch, wound up working at U.S. Steel for 30 years. In a cold, harsh winter climate half the year, in a language he didn't understand, with a wife he had barely met before marrying and bringing her with him to the U.S., and with 5 kids that he didn't really know how to deal with. And so my mother told me these stories of him talking late at night about how much he missed his childhood and how he'd wished that he could be back there and never did get back. And so I guess if there's a message in all of that, it is, if there's any sort of rift between you and a parent, now's a good time to fix it. And sometimes even if they're not alive, you'd be surprised at how much you can speak to them and hear them in your heart and give each other words of comfort and healing and love, maybe for the first time. I want to tell you one other story. This is from a friend who posted this remembrance of his father on Facebook yesterday. Sort of an antidote. This is a little long. He wrote, I want to read you the whole thing. I think it's important. He wrote, "My dad was a very loving man. Like so many Southern Baptists, he allowed his religion and political leanings to cloud his thinking and understanding of my sexual orientation. He was taught some truly awful untruths about my love, and flung the love the sinner but hate the sin and queer darts at me all too often. I understood his disappointment that his only blood son was gay, and also chose to not provide him with a grandson. It was a difficult relationship that we hobbled through for decades of annual holiday visits and brief hugs. Then, one day, toward the end of his all too short life, I received this one and only birthday card in the mail from him. It is one of my most precious treasures in life, and this week seems like the time to share it. I was able to be with him in the final weeks before cancer claimed him, and our healing was complete. Don't give up on him, friends. Love has a way of enduring and surviving all challenges." He writes, "I offer this post to remind us that love will conquer and will sustain us if we hold on to it and embrace it. Happy Father's Day, everyone." And this was the card. On the cover of it is a picture of a father and a son holding hands and walking across a bridge. And what it says on the inside of the card from the card company is, "Just when we're ready to shift into second gear, the old clutch begins to slip. Happy birthday." And his father wrote on a typewriter a note he inserted into the card. "Dear son, it seems that I can feel the old clutch beginning to slip, and before I am relegated to that great junkyard in the sky, I want to tell you again that I love you. I know that there is a great chasm between us. We each have our own code of ethics, standard of morality, politics, and religion. But I want you to know that over that chasm is a bridge called love. I am sorry for all the times and ways that I have hurt you, and forgive you for the hurt you have caused me. I want to assure you that every day I think of you, wonder about your well-being, and pray for you. I cannot change the way I am, so I accord you the same privilege. Just know that I will always love you. Dad." I pray that each and every one of you heard this from your father, at least once in your life, if not more. For those who didn't, I pray that you are able to forgive your father for not being the man you needed in your life. And I pray that you can find him among the baggage in which he's hidden all these years. Baggage of your own making or of his. Just as Saul never wanted to be king, maybe our fathers never asked to be burdened with the traits and responsibilities our society insisted they have as men. Strong warriors capable of anything, successful at everything they tried, breadwinners and providers who never faltered. Someday our fathers will just be allowed to live as who they really are or longed to be. In heaven, if not here. And maybe what biologist Martha Weiss wrote when describing the cicadas now swarming over the east can be true of our fathers as well, of fathers and cicadas. She wrote, "They really can't hurt you. They just want to sing, mate, have babies, and then they're going to be gone." So God bless our fathers this day.